Microsoft quietly made a decision that will affect 240 million people, and most of them do not even know it yet. Starting next year, millions of Windows 10 computers will stop receiving security updates, and Microsoft has designed Windows 11 to require hardware that most of those computers cannot support. You are being pushed toward an upgrade you do not need, and your only alternative has always been sitting right there, waiting for you to notice it. I left Windows 11 after 2 years of frustration, and I found something that works better, costs nothing, and runs on basically any computer made in the last decade. This is not an extremist Linux video where I tell you to delete everything and learn command lines. This is a real conversation about what actually happened, why it happened, and one specific Linux distribution that changed my entire perspective on what a desktop operating system can be. Let me take you back to 2021 when Windows 11 launched. Microsoft said the new requirements were about security. They said your old computer needed a special chip called TPM 2.0 and a modern processor to keep you safe from viruses and hackers. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but here is what nobody explained properly. TPM stands for Trusted Platform Module, and it is essentially a tiny security chip built into some motherboards. Microsoft made it mandatory for Windows 11, which meant millions of perfectly functional computers suddenly could not upgrade. They told you your hardware was too old. They told you it was a security risk to keep using it, and they made you feel like the only option was buying a new computer. But here is the thing that nobody is telling you. Those same computers running those same processors can run Linux perfectly fine. Linux does not require TPM 2.0. Linux does not require specific modern processors. Linux will run on hardware that Microsoft told you was obsolete. This is the part where most people stop listening, but you should not, because this affects you directly if you own a computer that is more than 3 years old. The narrative that you need new hardware is a business decision dressed up as a technical requirement, and once you understand that, everything else in this video makes sense. So, what exactly is wrong with Windows 11? Let me give you the real answer instead of the surface-level complaints. The system requirements are only the beginning. Windows 11 came with a completely redesigned interface that removed features people used every day. Remember the ability to drag windows to any position on screen without snapping? That is gone. Remember the simple right-click menu that had everything you needed? That is replaced with a clunky grid of icons that takes extra clicks to get to the same options. Microsoft reorganized their interface to match their tablet and phone designs, and in doing so, they made the desktop experience worse for people who use computers with keyboards and mice. This is what happens when a company prioritizes consistency across devices over actually listening to what their desktop users want. The updates became longer and more disruptive. Every major Windows update seems to break something. People report their computers not booting, files disappearing, drivers failing, settings resetting. Microsoft pushes updates to hundreds of millions of devices simultaneously, and when something goes wrong, it goes wrong at massive scale. We have all seen the headlines about Windows updates causing blue screens or rendering computers unusable. This is not paranoia or exaggeration. Search any major tech forum, and you will find thousands of posts from people whose computers broke after an update. The difference with Linux is that updates are incremental, tested by communities before deployment, and you can postpone them if you need to. You are never held hostage by an update that arrives at the worst possible moment. Performance started degrading in ways that felt unexplained. New Windows installations run fine, but after months of use, systems slow down. Startup programs accumulate, services run in the background, consuming resources. Cortana, Microsoft Edge, the new AI features, all of these are running constantly, even when you are not using them. The operating system keeps getting bigger and hungrier, while the hardware requirements keep increasing. Eventually, your 5-year-old computer that worked perfectly when you bought it starts feeling sluggish, and Microsoft says it is time to upgrade again. But the truth is that Windows 11 itself is consuming more resources every year, and they design it that way intentionally. This is where the story pivots, because I tried something different. Instead of buying new hardware, I decided to try Linux. Now, I know what you are thinking. Linux is complicated. Linux is for programmers. Linux does not have the software you need. These are the same concerns I had, and they are the same concerns everyone has before they actually try it. But in 2026, Linux has changed dramatically from what you might remember from years ago. The interfaces are beautiful, the software availability is excellent, and the installation process takes about 20 minutes if you follow simple instructions. I tried several distributions looking for something that would feel familiar, something that would not require me to relearn everything from scratch, and then I found one that changed my mind completely. If this video is making you reconsider your options, I need you to do something right now. Put your thoughts in the comments below. Do not just lurk, actually engage. YouTube rewards videos that people comment on, and I want this video to reach more people who need to hear this. Also, hit that like button if you got value from this. It takes 1 second, and it really helps the channel grow. More people need to know that alternatives exist, and your interaction helps spread the word. The distribution I want to talk about is Linux Mint. Now, I know some of you have heard of Mint and maybe dismissed it as just another Linux version, but let me explain why it matters and why it feels exactly like Windows used to feel before Windows got complicated. Linux Mint is based on Ubuntu, which means it has access to an enormous ecosystem of software. But what makes Mint special is its philosophy. The developers focus on making Linux accessible to people coming from Windows. The default desktop layout looks familiar. The start menu works the way you expect. You can right-click and get the options you need. Nothing about it feels foreign or intimidating if you have used Windows for years. The performance difference is immediately noticeable. I installed Linux Mint on the same computer that was struggling with Windows 11, and it ran like I had just bought new hardware. Boot time went from over a minute to under 15 seconds. Applications opened instantly. The entire system felt responsive and clean. And here's what really shocked me. The computer that Microsoft told me was too old for Windows 11 runs every program I need without any issues. Web browsing works perfectly. Office documents open and save correctly. Even some Windows-exclusive software has Linux alternatives that do the same job just as well. The key applications that most people need are available, and they work without the overhead that Windows carries. Privacy is another area where the difference becomes obvious. Windows 11 sends telemetry data to Microsoft constantly. It tracks your typing, your applications, your location, your usage patterns. The settings to disable this are buried deep in menus, and some of them still send data even when turned off. Linux Mint does not phone home. There is no telemetry. There is no activation required. The software on your computer belongs to you and only you. Nobody's watching what you do, nobody is selling your data, and nobody can remotely disable your system if you miss a payment or disagree with a policy change. This is not paranoia. Microsoft has documented this behavior, and it is legal because you agreed to their terms when you set up Windows. With Linux, the terms are different. You own your system completely. Software installation on Linux Mint is actually easier than on Windows in some ways. There is something called the Software Manager, which is essentially an app store built into the system. You search for what you need, click Install, and it happens automatically with no tricky options or confusing menus. Most common software is available through this interface with one-click installation. For software that is not in the store, you can download it directly from developer websites, just like on Windows. The system handles dependencies automatically, which means you do not have to hunt for missing files or worry about compatibility. Everything just works together, because Linux has a unified package management system that Windows simply does not have. The gaming situation has improved dramatically as well. Steam works on Linux through a compatibility layer called Proton. Most Windows games run on Linux without any special configuration. You might have heard that gaming on Linux is difficult, but the situation in 2026 is completely different from what it was even 3 years ago. Major game developers have started offering native Linux versions, and the Proton compatibility layer handles the rest. I was able to play my entire library with minimal issues, and the performance difference between Windows and Linux gaming is negligible on most hardware. If you are a gamer who thought Linux was not an option, you owe it to yourself to test it again because the landscape has changed completely. If you know someone who is still running Windows 10 on an older computer, share this video with them right now. They probably have no idea that their options are this simple. And if you are already using Linux, tell me in the comments which distribution you chose and why. I read every single comment, and your experience might help someone who is on the fence about making the switch. Let me address the concerns people typically have before switching. What about Microsoft Office? This is usually the biggest question. The honest answer is that Microsoft Office works in a browser through office.com, and for most people, this is completely sufficient. You have access to Word, Excel, and PowerPoint through any browser without installing anything. For the few people who need advanced features, LibreOffice is a free alternative that opens and saves Microsoft formats correctly. The days of needing Windows, specifically for Office, are largely over, though I will be honest about the rare edge cases where something does not work perfectly. Most users will never encounter these issues. What about printer support? Printers typically work better on Linux than on Windows, because most manufacturers now provide Linux drivers, or the open source community has created drivers that work better than the official ones. The system automatically detects printers on your network and configures them without manual intervention. I have not had a single printer issue in 6 months of using Linux Mint, which is more than I can say for my Windows years. What about security? People assume Linux is safer because fewer people use it, but the reality is deeper than that. Linux has a fundamentally different architecture that makes certain types of attacks much harder to execute. The permission system means that even if you download something malicious, it cannot take over your entire system without your password. There are no registry files that can be corrupted. There are no system files that randomly break. Linux systems tend to remain stable for years without reinstallation, which is something Windows cannot claim. Viruses targeting Linux exist, but they are rare because criminals focus their efforts on the largest user base, which is Windows. Using Linux does not make you invincible, but it does make you a much less attractive target. The updates on Linux are also more controlled. You see every update before it installs. You can read what it does and decide whether you want to install it. If an update causes problems, you can roll back to the previous version easily. This is in stark contrast to Windows, where updates happen automatically and sometimes break things before anyone knows what went wrong. The transparency and control that Linux provides gives you peace of mind that Windows simply cannot match. You are never wondering what changed overnight, because you can see exactly what the system did and when it did it. The migration process itself is simpler than most people imagine. I backed up my documents, photos, and important files to an external drive. I downloaded the Linux Mint ISO file, created a bootable USB drive using a free tool, and installed it in about 20 minutes. The installer even offered to keep my Windows files in a separate partition in case I wanted to go back. I did not need to go back, but knowing the option existed made the process less intimidating. Most of my files transferred easily, and the programs I used most often had Linux equivalents waiting in the software manager. The entire process from decision to fully working system took less than a day, and most of that time was waiting for files to copy. The community support around Linux is genuinely exceptional. When I ran into questions during my first week, I found answers in minutes by searching online. Linux has been around since the early 1990s, and there is an enormous knowledge base accumulated over decades. Everything you might need to know has been discussed, documented, and solved by someone, somewhere, at some point. If you get stuck, someone has already been stuck in that exact spot and figured out the solution. The open source community is passionate about helping new users because they remember being new themselves. The cost difference deserves its own mention. Windows 11 costs around $150 if you buy it outright, or you pay for it indirectly when you buy a new computer. That is $150 for an operating system that monitors your activity, shows you advertisements, and pushes updates when you do not want them. Linux Mint costs nothing. The software costs nothing. The updates cost nothing. You own everything you have installed with no limitations, no subscriptions, and no expiration dates. For families with multiple computers, this adds up to real money that could go toward hardware upgrades or other needs instead of recurring operating system costs. The desktop environment that Linux Mint uses is called Cinnamon, and it deserves specific praise. It feels polished and modern without being flashy or distracting. The Start menu has a search function that finds applications and files instantly. The taskbar shows your open windows clearly. The system tray has all the usual indicators for network, volume, battery, and time. Nothing about it feels like a compromise or a workaround. It feels like a well-designed workspace that respects how you actually work. Microsoft spent years making Windows look and feel a certain way, and Linux Mint captured the best parts of that experience while leaving out the parts that made Windows frustrating. Before we wrap up, let me make sure you understood the key point here. The reason this is happening is not because technology failed. It is because companies made business decisions that affected your technology. Microsoft designed Windows 11 to require newer hardware because they make money when you buy new computers. They removed features you liked because they want you to use their cloud services instead. They increased resource usage because they are building toward a future where your computer is just a thin client connected to their servers. Understanding the difference between technical requirements and business decisions is what helps you make better choices about your own technology. Got it? Good, because it matters. This is the part where most people stop watching, but you should not, because the final piece is what makes everything click. The future of personal computing is changing. Cloud services are becoming more capable, local processing is becoming less necessary for everyday tasks, and the line between operating system and service is blurring. Microsoft wants you to rent access to their ecosystem rather than own your own software. Google is pushing Chrome OS as a lightweight alternative. Apple is locking their devices ever more tightly. Linux stands apart from all of this because it belongs to everyone and no one simultaneously. It cannot be taken away, it cannot be restricted, and it cannot be turned into a subscription service. When you use Linux, you are using something that will exist and work tomorrow exactly as it works today, regardless of what any company decides to do with their products. If this video helped you understand something that seemed complicated, subscribe to this channel. We make videos like this every week that help you stay ahead of tech changes that affect your daily life. Hit the bell icon so you do not miss our next video. See you in the next one. The practical path forward is simpler than you think. If you have an older computer that cannot run Windows 11 smoothly, do not rush out to buy new hardware. Instead, download Linux Mint, try it on a USB drive without installing anything, and see how it feels on your actual computer. You will be surprised by how capable it is. Your documents will still be there. Your photos will be accessible. Your web browser will work exactly as you expect. The only thing that changes is the underlying system running everything. And that change might be exactly what your computer needs to feel fast and responsive again. The best part is that you do not have to commit immediately. You can keep Windows on your computer alongside Linux and choose which one to use each time you start up. This is called dual booting, and it lets you test the waters without jumping in completely. Once you feel comfortable, you can move entirely to Linux. Once you do, you will wonder why you waited so long. Your computer will thank you, your privacy will thank you, and your wallet will definitely thank you. The era of accepting whatever operating system companies force on you is ending. The alternative has been here all along, waiting for you to notice it. It is free, it is powerful, and it works on the computer you already own. All you have to do is try it.